Welcome, everybody, to our Enneagram Community of Practice session, a little earlier than usual because Frederik, Dr. Frederik, I'm not sure how you say your surname, Coene, is it?
Coene.
Coene, okay.
Right.
Dr. Frederik Coene, I should have checked that before, is in Bali on a 2-year sabbatical with his family. Frederik, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit more, but I know what we sent out to everybody, the little blurb, is that you're an EU diplomat who's currently on a 2-year sabbatical, has 2-year parental leave, which I think every single organization should have, frankly. So with his family in Bali, he has been interested in understanding human nature for the past decade and spends most of his free time carrying out research on the Enneagram. And his free course on sex on the Enneagram can be found on youtube.com/@Enneapath. And Frederik, I'm going to hand over to you to share a little bit more. I'm really curious how an EU diplomat ended up doing research on sex and the Enneagram and what that entailed. And yeah, thanks in advance for the generosity of having made that available to everybody for free on YouTube. That's amazing. And we look forward to hearing your words of wisdom. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Renata, for the introduction and for having me on your community of practice. First thing, I may have some internet issues, so let me know if you're not hearing me, because I just saw sometimes like your connection is unstable. So just let me know and I'll try to figure something out. But so yeah, let me start, why would a diplomat start doing research on sex? It's like a very weird combination, right? Well, first of all, I'm more a researcher by nature. I'm more somebody who's interested in understanding why things are happening the way they are happening. But doing this kind of freelance research outside of some kind of academic setting, you're not going to be able to make a living, unfortunately. And especially if you would come with topics related to the Enneagram, good luck finding some kind of research grant, of course. So how did I get to this topic? I think there's different things. Like any researcher normally is interested in something that has some kind of personal background, right? So for me, it was also like, I wanted to make sense of the topic of sex and sexuality. It was like, well, as any human being, I also have a sex life, but like, what does all of this mean? Like, why, how, like, why are people sometimes dissatisfied and so on and so on? And things didn't really make sense to me. And for those of you who don't know me, I identify as a self-preservation 6. So what I tend to do is, if I don't understand something, I'm going to research it in a very, very thorough way. I'll dig very deep and try to put it in some kind of conceptual framework, and that's how I'll be able to operate. Now, this specific topic, what happened was I happened to overhear a discussion between two women, two people that I know pretty well. I was just in the next room, and it was a self-preservation 2 and a social 9. And they were talking about sex, and it just did not make sense at all. It was like the self-preservation 2, who is like radiating the sexuality, who is like this deep cleavage and so on, was talking about some kind of inhibition in the bedroom. And then you had this social 9 who was dressed in a rather conservative way. And if you would say that she's living in a monastery, you would believe it. But she was talking about threesomes and all this kind of stuff. And it was like, what? So I just had to make sense out of it. So fortunately, these women also know the Enneagram, and I was so impolite to put myself in the middle of the discussion and try to make sense out of that. It was very difficult, but then I started asking other people as well, like, how do you think your type, instinct, sex, and so on and so on. Now, at some point, there was a call for proposals for the IEA conference in Lisbon, and I told my wife, I'm going to apply. I am going to present on the topic of sex and the Enneagram. And my wife said, no way, come on, you don't know anything about this. Like, why are you doing this to yourself and to me? But sometimes I do this kind of strange things, and then my proposal got accepted, and I was like, oh, darn, I have to figure something out now because I've got nothing to talk about. So I had about 6 months, and I started just speaking to people, and I talked to about 30 people, and I had some kind of preliminary ideas, and that's what I presented. And of course, if you go to a conference and you talk about sex and there are parallel sessions, then of course everybody's coming to your session. So I had like 80% in my room. And then unfortunately for the others, they had like 4 or 5 people in their session. But it really stimulated me because I didn't really have very concrete conclusions, but people really were very supportive. Like after my presentation, there were so many comments, questions, and so on. And it really stimulated to continue. And then suddenly we have COVID hitting in. Like there we are, confined at home. What do you do? Well, some would have sex. In my case, it was, I'm going to research sex. So I was able to find some other people who are also looking at sex and the Enneagram. We had some sessions, and then we decided together to start some research. So yeah, about 4 years ago, actually, we started focus group discussions. So we found people of the same type, and we put them in 9 groups. And each of these 9 groups had 9 sessions in which we talked about sex. We had no clue what the questions were going to be because we didn't know what we were looking for. But we had some very interesting discussions, and I was able to come up with some material that you can find in this free course you can find on this YouTube channel. But there are still some gaps in there, so we are still continuing the research. So for people that are interested in also participating, and if you would like to be a member of a focus group that focuses on the subtypes, please reach out to me and we'll be happy to include you. I think everything froze here. Do you hear and see me?
Yes, can hear and see you perfectly. Thanks, Frederik.
Okay, very good, because I don't see any movement, but the main thing is that you hear and see me. So if there are people that would like to participate in these subtype meetings, we have 7 sessions, 2 in which we just discuss like what is so specific to the subtype, just to get a better understanding of each of the subtypes and just to getting to know each other. And then we'll have 5 sessions going very, very deep into the subtype and sex. We are now in the process of doing all the subtypes for 5s and 6s, but if you're another type and you want to participate, reach out to me, I'll include you. Because it's not only you contributing to the research, you actually do get a lot out of it yourself, because it doesn't happen very often that you have some kind of guided discussion on the topic of sex and the Enneagram. And many of the people who participate, they say it has some kind of therapeutic effect because they can speak with other people of their own subtype and they understand each other. And this brings me to the next topic, like, why is this topic so important? Because when I started this topic 4 years ago, people thought like, oh my God, Frederik, he must be some kind of pervert. And when I applied for another Enneagram conference, the comment I got was like, no, exclamation mark, just no, 3 exclamation marks. So, well, I tend to be a little bit persistent when I'm really like focused on something, but it just showed that the Enneagram community, to a certain extent, was not ready for this topic. And even when I spoke to marriage counselors at Enneagram conferences, and I said like, so how do you discuss the topic of sex with your clients? They said, well, you know, we normally don't. And I was amazed because, look, really, if there is a problem in marriage, then often some sexual issues can be at the basis of the marital problems, or they're going to be a consequence of another underlying problem. But sex is always going to be part of the equation. Like, how can you leave it out? And then the second thing is that when we're talking about personal development, growth, spiritual growth, it's about sorting out the issues you're not comfortable with. I mean, if you've got a good relationship with your mother and you're going to sort out your relationship with your mother, there's not going to be any growth. You have to tackle the issues that happen to be somehow traumatic for you, right? Because our level of development is all, how do we deal with tricky situations? How do we deal with something that triggers us? How do we deal with past trauma? And if we're looking at sex, I would dare say that most of us in this Zoom room here have some form of sexual trauma. Not that we have been subjected to some kind of sexual abuse, but if you're just looking at the value systems in which many of us grew up in, lots of sexual repression, that leads to a certain trauma. Just the fact that many people feel very at unease to speak about the topic of sex. Like, why? I mean, why can you talk to your spouse, to your friends about food? You can speak about work, you can speak about relationships, but the topic of sex is like, ooh, that's off limits. And I'm not saying that you have to tell your friends like what you do in the bedroom and what your favorite positions are. No, that's not the thing, but it's more like, what does this bring to you? How do you feel about your sex life? All this kind of things. So it's a matter of making it somehow debatable. But the problem is that if you don't have a vocabulary, if you don't have a framework to talk about it, it's very difficult to do so. So this is something that I try to change. I try to bring the vocabulary. I try to make it discussable. And actually, the good thing about the Enneagram, it's something that you should actually never do. Like what you should never do with the Enneagram is you should never say that, oh yeah, but I'm a type 6 and this is what 6s do, right? That's something you shouldn't do. You should not hide behind your type. You should not claim that you're innocent just because it's your type that's guilty. But I think sometimes it can be useful, because if in sex, if you can say that, well, if you can talk to your spouse and say, hey, for example, I'm a type 6, my wife is a 2. If I would say, well, did you know that the type 6 tends to be like this and that and that, and I heard that type 2 is like this and that, you make it less personal. People are no longer going to be that much into the defensive, right? If you can speak about types in general, you're not talking about yourself. And after some time, you may feel more at ease and also bring in your own perspective. So that's why I think the Enneagram is actually something very good, something that we should be using here. So before I start and give some kind of presentation, I would actually prefer to hear from you, like, what are the things that you're interested in? What are the things you would like to hear me talk about? Because I can speak for 10 hours without any problem, but I would actually like that what I'm going to say is going to flow, is going to be in a flowing way, and that it's going to tackle the main issues that you're mentioning. So just let's, for 1 or 2 minutes, like, I want to give you the time, like, do you have anything on your mind? If you don't want to speak in front of other people, you can also just send a private message to me and I'll just say anonymously like what the question or so is.
I'm just curious to know if you discovered any particular themes with types, if there are similarities in approaches or, sexual lives of the different types. Because I know, I've got a best friend who's the same type as me, born on the same day within the same hour, and she's also self-preservation 3, and we're very different sexually because girlfriends, we talk, so we know. So I'm curious to know if you did find particular themes with subtypes or types. Yeah. Who else has got a question or a comment?
Yeah. I do. I'm really interested to get some information about what it all looks like, what you have discovered, because I would love to learn some more. As you said, this is not a subject that we talk about.
You're not going to tell me have no questions that you're like, everybody must have some things that they're interested in, right?
Frederik, maybe, are you not hearing Fiona? She was busy asking a question.
Can you hear me, Frederik? I think there was a delay.
Oh, he's frozen now.
Oh dear.
I think he must not have
now he's gone.
Okay, I'm sure he'll be back. Oh, there you are, Frederik.
Okay. I'm back. I hope it was my internet.
Yes, I think so. So Fiona was in the middle of a question when you said, doesn't anybody have a question? So Fiona
I
started.
was not kicked out, Renata, right? So it was just my internet. That's good to know.
Great. Okay.
Okay.
Fiona, start again, Fiona.
Thanks, Renata. Frederik, I'm very interested to hear what you have learned so far, and it sounds like your research is still in the early days. But I would love to learn more to be able to use this information, not only to help myself, but also with potential clients, because as you mentioned, it's not a topic that comes up very easily. And I think being able to articulate it through Enneagram types might make it more digestible and easier for people to access, so that we can actually support people in their journey and understand more about what is going on with individuals, and potentially give us as Enneagram practitioners maybe more courage to broach the subject if we're finding we're working with clients who are having relationship issues, to give us that opportunity. So that would, I don't know if you can answer all of that at this stage, but that's certainly my long-term hope around this topic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Anybody else got a question or something you're in, Terry? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious around the whole area of instincts and subtypes. So, I mean, I'm sure you, so for example, self-pres may be a more cozy, intimate, whereas, well, sexual one-to-one is more about the that one-to-one encounter. So I think there might be different energies involved within the, and then if you have partners with one-on-one. So I would be interested to know if you've got some comments or helpful things to say on that.
Great question, Terry. Thanks. Who else has got something you're curious about? I would love to also hear. Seems like such a typical like horoscope question, you know, if there are any types that are particularly more compatible sexually based on their Enneagram types. I'm sure that you don't have an answer. Bernard.
Oh, yes.
I'm just interested, Frederik.
Yes? Who's speaking?
I think it's Steph.
Renata,
Yes,
it's Steph.
Yes.
I put a message in the chat. I was just curious to know, in my coaching practice this year, I seem to be dealing with a lot of couples where one party has had there's been a third party involved. And so I'm curious if Frederik has seen any pattern of a particular type or a subtype that tends to look outside the relationship rather than inside the relationship to meet the need.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, thanks. I actually don't see your...
This was not the first question. Normally, this is always like the first or second question. I was already thinking, like, when is it going to come?
Hilarious. Sorry, Bernard, did you carry on?
I was just two questions. Well, one's the question is, Frederik, have you ever shared this information with a sex therapist, and what is their link between what you've discovered and what their work is? And then the second one is purely just an observation, and I'm curious to know about myself in the sense that, why did I never ever think of linking the two? It was the Enneagram who lives in a world over there, and our sex and sexuality and sex lives in a world over there. And I never, ever thought of what happens when you bring the two together. And that's just purely an observation from my side about myself. It was just, they were like two different silos completely. And I don't know if that's something that that came through in any of your work, but those were the two, question and observation. Thank you.
I think you got a bit to work with there, Frederik, for starters. Don, go ahead.
I guess I would add one thing is about generational. I look at my generation and inhibitions of a Christian upbringing, and I look at my kids' generation of relationships and sex, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, these worlds are so different. So I'm just wondering if there's a generational take in your research, and it seems like that's actually important. Yeah.
Great question. Sarah, go for it.
Also, actually, just really resonating with Bernard's question around a sex counselor, a sex therapist, and just if that has come into part of your conversations and research and focusing, and any insights that have come out of that. And then really intrigued, because I kind of, as you asked the question, I was sitting with it and kind of going, so what brought me here? What has made me act and come to this particular conversation of all of the myriad of Enneagram conversations that are out there? And I was thinking about how, to me, sexual energy is like this life force. And very similar to what Bernard actually also said around how it's a life force. It's so absolutely intrinsic in the conversation as to your drive, your energy, your passion, and your potential to shift and change and move in certain directions. And really interested to know whether that has also been part of your research in the conversations that you've had in these focus groups, and how unlocking that is so much linked to, because the Enneagram is a model that helps us to make changes and develop and shift in the direction of ultimately our truest, most authentic selves. So yeah, fascinated by that link, and then just kind of reflecting on that's what brought me here.
You got enough to work with, Frederik?
Oh yeah, for sure. I also got a couple of other questions here in the chat. So let me try to address all these things, and I'll try to weave it into one presentation session of about an hour and 15 minutes, and then we can still have another 15 minutes for some questions. I just want to start first with like the question of how you can use that with your own clients. What about sex therapists and so on? I actually started a PhD in clinical sexology 4 years ago, because I thought that if I am going to do something, I have to do it well, and I have to understand what the experts are saying. So I did the first year of a PhD program, but I dropped out after the first year because I found it very difficult to reconcile my personal views with current sex therapy in the US. My personal view, and again, this is my personal view, is that in the past, there was sexual repression. And people thought that if there's an issue around sex, you just repress it. Now, we're like in the complete opposite. It's like anything goes. And that's part of what's happening in our Western civilization. And unfortunately, I would say that the US is maybe taking a little bit the forefront of that, where you have a pathologization of normal things and where you have a normalization of pathologies. What do I mean? Like everybody in the US seems to have ADHD. But what is ADHD? ADHD is just a normal reaction of your psyche in a society that is somehow not functional. But then when people have some kind of psychological issues or anything like that, you cannot call things by their name. Everything is like normal. Everything is fine. And I think we need to make a distinction between acceptance and accepting these people and see what is happening. But it doesn't mean that this is all normal, natural, healthy behavior. It's not all mature. And this is a little bit the challenge that I have with sex therapy, because sex therapy nowadays, I feel, is not tackling the core of the issue. In order to, if we're looking at sexual dysfunctions, very few dysfunctions have a truly medical nature. And even if there's a medical nature, there's always something psychological behind it. But most of it, you can actually go back to deeper issues. If you're looking, for example, somebody who has erectile dysfunctions, low libido, anorgasmia, problems with lubrication, and so on and so on. In almost all of these cases, you can sort it out if you would work with this person on a psychological level. But it would take a couple of years to go to the true depth of it. So it's much easier just to say, hey, here's some Viagra. Here you've got this and that and that. People who are taking antidepressants, SSRIs, are almost all going to suffer from certain side effects in the sexual domain. So what do? You just give some other drugs. So you just give drugs to deal with the side effects of the drugs that were there as a side effect of other drugs. I want to look at it from a different angle. The path that I prefer to take is much more complicated. It's much more difficult, but it's tackling the root cause. And this is where the Enneagram comes in a very useful way. Now, how have I discussed this with other sex therapists? When I did the first round of focus groups, I did this together with Valerie Wanamaker. She's a marriage counselor, and she's also, by now, she should have her ASEC accreditation, which is the American Association for Sex Therapists and Educators, or whatever it's called. So she has a deep background in dealing with sexuality issues. But also later, when we already had our research done and we started discussing, we found out other people. And we have actually been working, we have, let's say, a core group of 6 people approximately, 5 out of which are sex therapists, and who are now also making more use of the Enneagram in their own work because they see the value of that. These were, I come with a research background, they come with a clinical, practical background, and the two really match together. So, for example, in the IEA conference that was in Stockholm, I think 2 years ago, the one last year in San Francisco, our little group of people, we got together, we did like a panel discussion and so on, and we brought in the different angles. So there is a discussion with sex therapists on all of this. And actually what I want to do at the end of this research, so I would say that, I mean, it's not in the initial states, it's already pretty advanced, but now it's just a matter of filling in the gaps. But once all of that is going to be done, I want to write a book that is going to be for people who know the Enneagram, but also for people who do not know the Enneagram, that are interested in sexuality and where I bring in the Enneagram. But it's also going to be aimed at sex therapists, but also marriage counselors, so that they know how to deal with it. So for example, I also will have charts for each type and showing like which sexual dysfunctions are caused by which cognitive error that the type has. It's going to be like a flow chart that's really going to show logically like how does that come? And that's going to help, I hope, those sex therapists and marriage counselors that really want to work with clients, or let's say the other way, where they have clients that are willing to do the real work. Because that's not going to work for most people. 90% of people come to a therapist and say, give me the solution. And I want it to be as easy as possible, right? So at the end of all this research and so on, there is going to be material for therapists to use that. Because indeed, many of you may be therapists, and you may have a degree in psychology, for example, or in coaching. But if you don't have the conceptual knowledge around sex, if you don't know how to structure it, how to frame it, what is linked with what, then it's very difficult to talk about the topic of sex. In reality, it's all very straightforward. I will be talking a little bit about some stuff, and I think actually nothing's really going to surprise you. We just don't think about it, right? And this brings me to the second question. Like from one side, it's like we have spirituality or growth path, and then we have sex. And it's as if these two are not working together. Why? Many of the spiritual traditions are still a little bit following a religious approach. Almost all religions are sexually repressive. Now, I don't know if many of you are familiar with spiral dynamics. People are, some are not, okay. And this brings me to another issue that some raise, and maybe an answer to your question, Renata, about your friend who's also self-pressed 3, and that there are some differences. We also need to look at values. Sexual values have changed throughout the ages. And we can explain a lot through our type and our instinct, but you have to frame it within the value system in which we grew up and in which we operate. So for example, a person who grew up in let's say in a very radical Christian society, where sex before marriage is considered a sin, where masturbation is a sin, where the only reason for sex, the only valid reason for sex is procreation. A person in that environment, let's say a self-pres tree in that environment, is going to be pretty different from a self-preservation tree in an industrialized Western society, where it's all about more, more, more. I am going to get what I want to get. Everything goes as long as it's what I want. And it's also going to be very different from an environment, let's say in the Bay Area in the US, right? Where everything goes, where there are no more rules and where there's no more structure in life. So these value systems have changed. There is a good reason for it. There is a good reason why there was sexual repression. There is a good reason why sex therapy nowadays just comes in with medicine. But they all have their limitations. They don't come out of the blue. I mean, it's not that suddenly somebody said, oh, hey, let's repress everybody sexually. No, it is because what happened before was way worse. And for those of you who know spiral dynamics, the red stage is very much about, I take what I want. It's all about me. I don't care about the other. The only way to take care of that, the only way to make sure that your society is going to function is by having pretty strict rules. And by saying that sex can only take place in a caring relationship, which was not the case in red. It's only in a caring relationship. Nothing can happen outside. People who are too much driven to seeking sexual pleasure are going to they're not going to walk in line of society. They're just some kind of wild cases. So you need to like bring them back within certain structure of society. And it's a solution, but it doesn't mean that at the end of the day, it's going to be healthy, that people are going to have a mature sexuality. So also in the video course that is there, I speak about 2.5 hours, I think, about these values. How do sexual values evolve? Because without that, it's very difficult to understand how you as a person with your type and instinct, how you're actually going to show up. It does not happen in a vacuum. So what are the main conclusions of the research so far? First of all, sexual compatibility. That's something that comes up very often, like, oh, I feel that I love my partner, but we're sexually incompatible. Like, what's this incompatibility? Well, there's two aspects to it. First one is instincts. The second one is type. Instincts, what happens is that you've got a different temperament. I'll go in more detail about the instincts a bit later. I just want to like set the tone. But if there are different instincts, it might be very difficult to find common ground, because the self-preservation instinct is more resource aware, energy aware, if not to say energy efficient or even inactive and lazy in the worst cases. Whereas the sexual dominant is very often about just like, even if I don't have energy, I don't care, I'm just going to go for it. The social instinct is something completely different. It is more about, are we still fine in our relationship? But if you have, let's say, a sexual dominant together with a sexual blind, it can lead to this kind of temperamental difference where the sexual dominant, and it's not that they have a different libido. They can have the same libido. The question is just, how do they react to the libido? The sexual dominant person is going to say, I want sex, I'm going to have it. I must have it, right? That's what the sexual instinct is about. It's like, I see it, I must have it. Like, it's no discussion possible. Self-preservation is more like, yes, I want it, but how much energy do I have? What am I going to do? Am I only going to take care of my own orgasm, or will I also have to cater to the needs of my partner? How long is that going to take? Do I really feel like it? Am I not too tired? I didn't eat yet. So there's quite a few conditions that need to be met in order to really go for it. Now I'm, of course, caricaturizing, okay? Because you also have to put type in context to that. A self-press 5 and a self-press 8 or a self-press 3 are going to be pretty different, okay? And the self-press 3, the self-press 8 are still going to come up with a little bit more energy than a self-press 5. But still there is this kind of energy awareness. And if you have different instincts, that can lead to some problems. The second thing that leads to this sense of incompatibility relates to the motivations of sex. I mean, if I would ask you, like, why do you have sex? We're not going to do it just for the sake of time and so on, and also because you need a setting that feels very safe. But there were actually some psychologists at the University of Houston about 15 years ago, Meston and Buss, and they asked their students, like, why do you have sex? And all the students came up with their reasons, and then they compiled a list with 237 reasons for sex. But these two professors didn't really analyze, and they didn't really try to make sense of all of this. They didn't try to cluster it. But I tried to do that because the Enneagram can help. Now, if you look at, like, why do people have sex? I mean, let's first look, like, what are the functions of sex? And there are 3 distinct functions of sex. The first one is procreation. I think that's pretty logical. If you have sex, you can procreate, you're going to have offspring. I think you've all gone through biology classes. Many of you have kids. No more description needed. The second one is relaxation. Remember the good old days when you had Windows 95 and suddenly you have this blue screen where the system just doesn't work? There's like an overload or something like that. What you do is you just press the reset button and the computer would restart and everything would be fine again. The same happens with sex, actually. Sex, and especially orgasm, is some kind of reset button for our central nervous system. And it's actually very easy if you think about it. I mean, if you have a difficult day at work, somebody upset you, something's not going well, you feel depressed or something like that, and then you have sex, after sex, you're probably going to feel more at ease. You're no longer going to say, oh, I'm going to take revenge on my colleague. You're no longer going to think, oh, I'm going to tell my honest opinion. You're going to say, like, well, whatever. So what happens is that your nervous system that is like overreactive, this is going to like lower its frequencies. What happens actually is that the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system that are out of tune are going to be recalibrated. And actually, if you think about it, moment of orgasm is a moment of enlightenment. The French call orgasm la petite mort, the little death. Is it some kind of reset? It's a rebirth. That's actually the nice thing. If you look about spirituality, which some of you talked about already, there is a spiritual thing behind this kind of reset, about this enlightenment. If you feel like it, practical exercise for tonight. If you have a question that you're like thinking about, that you feel triggered about, but you're not able to look at it in an objective manner, think about it while you're having sex. Maybe don't tell it to your partner who may get upset. But what happens is that during the moment of orgasm, you're no longer going to be conditioned by the distortions of your ego fixation. Doesn't matter anymore. During orgasm, you can't feel pain. During orgasm, you don't feel depressed. You're in a very short-lived state of bliss. And this is actually this whole thing about this reset. This is why some people seek some kind of spiritual thing, or like going outside. It's like a spiritual experience. What's a spiritual experience? You're just getting into a different realm. You're going into a different level of development. And it feels like some kind of wow, great thing for some, especially for the sexual dominance, and that's great. And it can be a very strong resource. The problem, of course, is when people abuse this kind of resource, when it happens too often, because then you start losing the value of it, right? Also the same with Windows 95, the good old days when you had a blue screen. If you would push the reset button 7 times a day, your computer would just die after some time. So the same also happens here. You cannot reset it too often. So the functions of sex, first was procreation, second is relaxation, and the third is relation. During the sexual act, there is a release of oxytocin. Oxytocin is also called the love hormone. Oxytocin also gets released or secreted when a mother is breastfeeding her child. Why? Well, I never breastfed, but apparently what women say is that it can be a little bit of a nuisance, it can be painful, and stuff like that. But just there's a reason that you just want to do it. Why? It's just these neurotransmitters in your brain. It's biochemical. It's this release of oxytocin that just gives you this kind of bliss, and it wants you to care for kids. The same happens in sex with certain mammals and also with Homo sapiens, which we are. Why? If you look at the animal world, certain animals just get born and they can live on their own. They don't need a parent to survive. There's other animals that need the mother to survive. In some cases, like fish, it's the father that's going to take care of the offspring, not the mother. But the more complex living organisms get, the more difficult it is to get on your own feet. And this is why, for a single parent, it's much more difficult to raise your kids than in a biparental family. I mean, even more. If we're looking at the development of humans, 2 parents are actually not enough. What we have in our contemporary society, this nuclear family of just mommy, daddy, and kids, that's so dysfunctional. It's like the last 0.01% of human development or so that we have that. Before that, it was a whole village that was taking care of it. It was grandmothers who were taking care of the grandkids while the mother and father were just looking for food and preparing everything. There is even a theory that says that the reason why women live longer than men is exactly because of that, because the grandmothers were taking care of the grandkids and not the grandfathers. The grandmothers had more of a mission, they still had more of a value, a contribution they could make to society. So if we bring that back to the mother and the father, if the mother and the father are just together, like why would the father stay together and take care of his offspring? Right? If you're just very egocentric, like why care about your offspring? But if there's this release of oxytocin during the sexual act, mother and father are still going to stay together. They're going to care for each other. They're going to care for the offspring. It's all very well programmed by source, unity, God, whatever you want to call it. Now let's come back to the question, why do people have sex? Out of these 237 reasons that Meston and Buss came up with, only 20% related to this kind of 3 functions of sex. The rest was, I want to have sex because I want to feel loved, I want to feel powerful, I want to feel taken care of, because I feel it's my duty, and so on. They've got nothing but 0 to do with the true functions of sex. So apart from the procreation, relation, and relaxation, there's also ego gratification. Humans seek ego gratification through sex. And very often that's one of the main driving forces. Sometimes it's not ego gratification, but still ego-driven. Let me give you an example. Type 2. I don't know if there's any 2s here, and please don't feel offended that I chose you. But if you go to a type 2 and you tell them, like, look, tonight we're going to have sex and you can choose. Either you're going to have a great sexual experience, or after the sex, you're going to hear, this was the best oral sex that I've ever had in my life. most likely the 2 is going to opt for the second option. Why? It gives such an ego rush. It's thanks to me, I did it. I was needed. I was indispensable. I was able to give my partner this great experience that nobody else could give before. That's not what sex was made for, right? I doubt that when God or creator or whatever came up with this idea of bringing sex to humans, I doubt this was part of the thinking. But this is what's happening. And every single type has something like that. Now, if you use that in sex and you're looking for something, you're looking for ego gratification in sex, then most likely you're actually not going to find it. You can never gratify the ego through anything else than being at ease with yourself. So if you're looking for ego gratification through the lens of your type and your instinct, and your partner is doing the same thing, you're going to look at each other like, there's something wrong with my partner. No, there's nothing wrong with your partner. It's like you go to the bakery and you ask, I want to buy a kilogram of sausages. And the baker says that I don't sell sausages. And then you tell the baker, like, what's wrong with you? Like, well, you're looking for something in the wrong place. And that's actually what's happening with sex with many people. And as people don't communicate with each other, they don't know what they want from each other. And this leads to this feeling of incompatibility, whereas in reality, people just haven't spoken to each other. Like, we do speak to our partner about how we deal with finances, right? Imagine you each deals with finances and you don't talk about it. Imagine each has his own parenting style and you never talk about, like, how are we going to deal with the kids? You're going to have problems, right? But in sex, there's actually quite some people who feel uncomfortable having a truly honest discussion about that. So it's not about incompatibility. It's about a lack of communication, a lack of understanding each other. So that's an important conclusion of the research. Another important conclusion of the research, which is both liberating and maybe frustrating for some, is that the more you work on yourself, not through sex, but in general, the more you do your work, the more you go through this process of spiritual growth, self-development, the more satisfied you will be with your sex life. But at the same time, most likely, the less sex you're going to have. Why? The higher you go in the levels of development, the more you're at ease with things, the less you're going to get triggered, the more you're at ease with every single aspect of your life. But the higher you are in these levels of development, the less need for sex you have, right? I mean, if you have kids already, you don't need more, okay? So that's not a reason to have more sex. If you feel more at ease, you don't need to reset your central nervous system anymore, correct? If you feel that you have this very strong bond with your partner, you don't need to create this oxytocin release through sex because you feel very much at ease. The oxytocin is there. So no more need for more sex. If you're in a higher level of development, you don't need the ego gratification that much anymore. So at the end of the day, the need for sex is actually going to get reduced. Now, to be fully clear, this does not mean that you're not going to have any sex, right? For some people, it actually may mean that they're going to have more sex, because for those people who are sexually repressed, going up the levels of developments also means that they're going to release this sexual repression from them, and they're going to feel more confident. They're going to accept their sexuality. They're no longer going to think that saints have no sex and I have to aspire to become a saint. They're just going to say sex is part of the human experience. Okay, but for people in a sexually more liberal environment, the quantity of sex is actually going to go down. So I think these are the main global conclusions, I would say. Now, about the instincts, let me open a slide for you. And if you want, I can send you the slides afterwards. There's actually 3 slides that I want to show to you. Before that, how familiar are you people with the zones in the instincts?
I think some are probably more familiar than others,
Okay.
but
Okay, so very briefly, like there are 3 instincts, and Russ Hudson, one of the main Enneagram teachers, I guess, I hope all of you know him, he came up with this theory that within each of the instincts, there's actually 3 domains. There's 3 zones or 3 clusters of instinctual habits. Because it's actually a wrong terminology to say we have 3 instincts. It's like shorthand for saying 3 clusters of instinctual habits. So each of these 3 instincts have like 3 subcategories, and each of these subcategories have like 5 habits, instinctual behaviors, or something like that.
Frederik, we're not seeing the slide, just in case.
Okay, yeah, I'll show it in a second.
Oh, okay.
So, I have used this work of Russ Hudson to actually dig deeper in how do the instincts show up in sex. So I'll talk a little bit about the instincts first, and then I'll talk briefly about the types as well. Why do I talk about instincts first? Instincts matter much, much more in terms of sex than the type. If we see some challenges and so on, if we're looking at similarities, the self-pres 1, self-pres 2, self-pres 3 are going to have much more in common than the self-pres 1, sexual 1, and the social 1. Okay? So let me share. Can I share something?
You should be able to.
Let me see. No.
Down at the bottom, it should say.
I can. Sorry. Okay, perfect. Can you see this screen now?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So, self-preservation instinct. There are 3 zones in there. One is, it's not being alive zone, it's actually the self-care zone. It's everything about taking care of myself, of the body, and so on and so on. The second cluster of instinctual habits in the self-preservation instinct is resources and practicality. The third one is all about home and comfort. Now, people who are self-preservation dominant are very much, let's say, orgasm focused. Their motivation for sex is very much aimed at the physiological release. Now, quite some people, many self-preservation dominant people are going to say, no, that doesn't resonate with me. There's 2 things here. First of all, women are conditioned to talk about the emotional aspect of sex. Saying that I want to have my orgasm is making her look as if she is somehow a lower being in certain value systems. In our societies, even in less repressive societies, there's still this thing that, like, for men, it's normal that they seek their orgasm, but for women, it should be more about the emotional context somehow. The second thing is that there are quite some women who are going to talk, and we're looking here especially at, I would say, the hard types, and especially 2s and 4s. They're going to say, no, it's all about the connection, it's all about the relationship, and so on. But then I have a big question. Many self-preservation 2 and self-preservation 4 women masturbate in order to achieve orgasm. Now, explain to me how masturbation links to this connection. I don't get it. Nobody has been able to explain it to me. But still, they care very much about orgasm. People who are self-preservation blind don't really care that much about orgasm, especially those who are social dominant and sexual second. Yes, I mean, sure, everybody likes to have their orgasm, but they're not going to care that much. They're not going to be like cranky if they didn't have their orgasm at the end of the sexual play. Self-preservation dominant, if they don't have their orgasm at the end of the day, they may not be happy. It can lead to them becoming asexual. It may lead to them to feel that sex is a duty to just fulfill the needs of my partner. Just because they cannot find what they need, and they may revert to masturbation in order to still get an orgasm and blame it's the partner and this and that and that. But the very important thing is everybody is responsible for his or her own orgasm. Just like never blame it on the partner. That's also one of the main takeaways, I would say. So another important aspect of this self-care zone is that there's a hierarchy of needs. If a self-preservation dominant person is sleepy, sex is probably not going to happen. It's very difficult. Again, type-specific issues may happen, but if we're looking at, for example, self-preservation fives, they may say, look, tomorrow I have to work. I will need energy, not tonight. Some even will say that I'm hungry, I can't have sex. I mean, imagine a sexual dominant person, right? Even today, we were having a discussion with some sexual fives, and there was one who said that she had a relationship with a self-preservation one. So one evening, her partner comes home, 6:30, and she was just craving to have sex with the guy. And she wanted to drag him into the bedroom, and the guy said, but I didn't have my dinner yet. She was like, what do you mean? Like, I want you now. I've been waiting for you. It's like, what do you mean? Like, we didn't eat yet. So you see, this can lead to some kind of, like, if you have different instinctual stackings, this can lead to some kind of situations where you think, like, there's something wrong with my partner. Well, no, there's nothing wrong with the partner. It's just you who don't understand what is happening and why this is happening. There is nothing good or bad, right? There's no right sexual behavior. There's no bad sexual behavior. There's only being at ease with your own sexual life and finding common ground with your partner. That's what it's all about. There's people who have sex once in 3 months, and they're happier than some people who have sex every night. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, how often you're doing it. It's all about this level of satisfaction. Then the next thing is the resources practicality. So they're very much energy aware. Self-preservation dominant people tend to think subconsciously like, how much energy am I going to put in here? And it means that very often self-preservation dominant people may prefer or may hope that the partner is going to be more active than they are themselves. They hope that, look, I would hope that I can be okay with doing 30% of the work and my partner is going to be doing 70%. Or even better, me 10 and my partner 90. It just comes somehow automatically to self-preservation dominant people. And again, many self-preservation dominant people, when they first hear, they're like, no, this doesn't apply to me. But I would say, like, really think about it. Like, how actively do you show up in the bedroom? Again, type-specific elements may appear here, okay? For some self-preservation dominant people, especially those who are sexual blind, it may feel like work, especially if their partner is having challenges to achieve orgasm and the self-preservation dominant person wants to really do a good job in pleasing the partner, then it can really feel like work. And if you think in advance, like, look, I want to have sex, but I'm going to put in a lot of work. Nah. So this is why very often self-preservation dominant people may actually find that masturbation is a good alternative because, look, as a good friend of mine once said, you're never served better than by yourself, right? So also here in terms of masturbation, you don't need to explain anything. You don't have to say what you like or dislike. You know best what you like, and it's going to be like the least energy consuming way of achieving your orgasm. Also, self-preservation dominant people tend to be slow to warm up. It's this crock-pot analogy. Like, if you wake up a self-preservation dominant person at 2 o'clock at night and you say, hey, I want to have sex, self-preservation dominant person is going to say, hey, you know, I was sleeping. I'm like, why are you doing this to me? Like, I'm not in the mood. or even if it's not 2 o'clock at night, if sex was not on their mind, it can be pretty difficult sometimes to get them in the mood. Yes, it may sometimes work. And also here, there's many other factors that play in. But very often they may say like, well, you know, I don't really feel like it. So this leads to an issue that we see very often with couples where both are self-preservation dominant, where they actually have less sex than what they actually would like to have. Just because in order to have all the preconditions met to engage in sexual activity, and both partners have to have them met, the odds are not super high that it's going to happen at the same time. It's an issue that we see quite often, actually. Now, the third thing about the self-preservation instinct is that people who are self-preservation dominant care about physical safety, physical comfort. Sex on the beach can sound very exciting, but you've got all this sand, it's not comfortable, and you're laying there, and maybe there's like a stone in your back, like, no way. Self-preservation blind people, and especially if they're sexual dominant, it's like super exciting. This is something new. I think a self-preservation person prefers just their own home space, the mattress that they're familiar with. There's some self-preservation people even who don't like having sex in a hotel. They don't like to have sex when they're visiting some friends for a week or something like that. It just doesn't feel good. It's like, also like, imagine you're having sex and suddenly like the arm or the leg of your partner is squeezing your breast. Like that doesn't feel comfortable. It's like a turn off very often. Self-preservation dominant, self-preservation blind people don't care. They don't even register that their breast somehow feels squeezed. There's even something exciting about it. It shows the intensity of it. Also, the mental safety has to be there. Self-preservation dominant people can't have sex after they had a fight. The residual anger and resentment that is going to be there is going to stay there for quite some time. But if you have self-preservation blind people, and especially sexual dominant people, they had a fight, they made up. Sex is just the best way to bridge this gap again. The sexual instinct is all about driving away, and when there's enough distance, trying to bridge it again. Sexual instinct is not only about attracting, it's also about pushing away. And if you have a fight, it's the ideal way of pushing away and then getting this intimacy and this reconnection again. So what about the sexual instinct? And you can already see that the sexual instinct and the self-preservation instinct have some kind of antagonizing impact on each other, right? So people who are self-preservation dominant and sexual blind, it's actually going to exacerbate it. And those who are sexual dominant and self-preservation blind, the sexual instinct is going to be further exacerbated, actually. The social instinct will have more of a softening effect. So, sexual instinct, the first one is all about attraction. Sexual dominant people are very good at flirting. Sexual blind people are not. They're like, they can be pretty obnoxious. They sometimes don't even notice. They don't even register when somebody's trying to flirt with them. Sexual dominant people, it comes somehow naturally, and they know if they're attracted to somebody. But what they also tend to do is they very often tend to idealize sex, the sexual act, the sexual partner, and so on. And that can lead to some challenges, right? Because whenever you idealize, the moment of truth is going to come up. The moment of disappointment will come up. There's also this kind of craving. It's a very possessive thing. Whereas many people think that the sexual instinct is about connecting with the partner. It's not about connecting. It's about having the partner. It's about possessing, about consuming the partner. It's like a little child that sees an ice cream and is, I must have the ice cream. There's no relationship between the kid and the ice cream. It's I must have. And this kind of consuming of the partner, and I'm going to try not to get too graphic here, but there is a certain tendency that sexual dominant people are more likely to consume sexual fluids than those who are not. I hope that I don't need to explain this deeper. Also, there are no boundaries in sexual play for sexual dominant people. Like, when we're here, there is no taboos, everything goes, as long as both partners agree to it, of course. But they're not going to be as restricted by societal values. Now, the second is the exploration zone. So there is more of a sense of novelty. Like, let me give the extreme of a couple that I know. And the woman is a self-preservation one. Second instinct is social, sexual comes last. And the spouse is a social, self-pres, and then sexual last 6. How does their sex life looks like? First position for some minutes, their second favorite position for some minutes, then their third favorite position for some minutes, and they both achieve their orgasm. Then they just cuddle, they wait for 15 minutes, and they repeat the same cycle. That is killing to a sexual dominant person. For this couple, they're happy with their sex life. They have a brilliant sex life. They do this twice a week, Mondays, Thursdays. Everybody happy. Don't try this with a sexual dominant person. Like that's going to be a reason for divorce. So the sexual instinct really wants to try new things. They want to, it's about seeking this adrenaline. It's about seeking some kind of mystery. And it's not that they're really like proactively thinking like, oh, let's do something new. No, it somehow comes automatically during the sexual play. Another thing is that they're also not prone to refusing sex. Whereas a self-preservation may refuse sex when they don't feel like it, the sexual dominant is not going to do that as easily. And they can also warm up more easily. It's like if sex is not on their mind, if you approach them in the right way, you touch them on the right spot, you make the correct remark that creates some kind of things in their head, off they go. They can go from 0 to 100 in 5 seconds. Not with the self-preservation dominant. The self-preservation is more like a diesel. Needs to warm up, for like the good old days where you had to like preheat the diesel, right? That's more the self-preservation. Like once they're into it, yes, fine, it'll go, but needs some time. The sexual instinct is more like the ignition of the gasoline motor. Now, the sexual dominant may look as if they have a higher libido, but this is not the case. It's just that they act more actively on this libido. Again, without generalizing all the subtypes here, okay? Now, the third thing about the sexual instinct is this merging zone. Sexual dominant people have sex to a certain extent because they are seeking some kind of merger. They seek some kind of transcendent state. It's really about this kind of, I mean, I'm sexual blind. When these sexual dominant people talk about like, it's about having this connection, and then like we completely surrender until the moment that we feel as if the outer layer of our body, that the atoms are like merging with each other. Like I've got no clue what these people are talking about, okay? I probably can't even explain it. I think that the sexual dominant people who are listening now are probably thinking like the guy is not really, he didn't get it. And I admit, I don't know how to explain how the sexual dominant person thinks and feels about sex. It's like alien to me. And again, not that it's good or bad, it's just different. Masturbation, if it is masturbation behind the back of the partner, the sexual dominant person can feel as if this is some kind of cheating because it's really like a missed chance for a connection. It's as if like, especially if the partner is masturbating and then there's not going to be any partner sex, the sexual dominant person can get really upset about this. For the self-preservation dominant person, for some types, actually, it's like, yeah, okay, fine, well, masturbation. If my partner masturbates and I don't have to do any of the work. I know a couple, 2 self-preservation dominant people. Their ideal sexual act is they're laying next to each other, both are masturbating, and they're happy. Again, if this is what makes you happy and this gives you this sense of fulfillment, fine, so be it. There's nothing wrong with that. But for sexual dominant people, it's not going to be like that. Yes, they can include masturbation in the sexual play. But there's something not right there. And again, as I'm talking about these instincts, there are nuances with the types and the subtypes, okay? I'm just drawing a certain caricature. Try to adapt this to your own type, please. Also, if we are looking at spiritual bypassing and using sex for spiritual bypassing, most likely these are going to be sexual dominant people. This does not mean that sexual dominant people are automatically going to bypass spiritually. No, not at all. But if you're looking at tantric workshops where all these people are achieving some kind of bliss and so on, 90% of people who attend these workshops are actually sexual dominant. And they don't really understand what the tantric practice is about. The tantric practice is all about presence. It's not about seeking a spiritual experience. I mean, if you seek a spiritual experience, it means that you cannot be spiritually elevated, right? I mean, you cannot stand on the top of a mountain and want to achieve the top of the mountain. You can only want to achieve the top of the mountain if you stand in the valley or somewhere in the middle, but not if you're on the top already. So then the next thing is a social instinct. Interpreting zone, well, people who are social dominant tend to be pretty good at tending to the needs of the partner, understanding what is the partner like, how can I cater to the needs of the partner, how do I make my needs somehow known. But at the same time, there can also be some kind of problems with communication sometimes, right? So it's more like very non-verbal, indirect, that they try to get this and pass it on to the partner. But more important is this connecting zone. People who play chess, they know that you have this kind of clock, right? So you make a move and you push the clock and then the clock starts ticking. And for social dominant people, there's something similar. And when they see that this clock is ticking and the clock is going pretty far, so they didn't have sex for, let's say, a week, it's like, clock is pretty far, I need to somehow reset this clock. So they're going to have sex. Why? It's like seeing, are we still fine? Is our relationship still fine? Are we still okay with each other? So it's not about the orgasm. It's not about seeking some kind of ecstatic experience. No, it's more about, hey, how's our relationship going? Instead of talking and asking so how are we doing? What's the state of play of a relationship? No, they'll just have sex in order to figure that out somehow. Also, people who are social dominant are still going to care a lot about people they had sex with. Even if it was a one-night stand 30 years ago, they may still have a specific place for this person in their heart because a certain connection was established. Except, of course, if there has been some kind of abuse, if it was a very unpleasant sexual encounter or something like that. But most likely there is going to be something that is staying there. Also, for many social dominant people, there needs to be a true connection before they can move to sex. Just pure one-night stands, just for the sake of getting this kind of physiological pleasure, is something that's not really appealing to the social dominant. Self-predominant people may feel okay with it. It's well, you meet somebody, you're going to have your orgasm. Hey, great. Social dominant, not like that. And for many social dominant people, sex can feel like the continuation, the logical continuation of a deep connection that has been established through some kind of discussion. So imagine you've been speaking to somebody for a whole evening and you have you have built up this deep connection. There may be subconsciously some kind of urge of deepening this connection in a non-verbal way, and sex may be a tool for that. Again, not that all social dominants will experience that. Some people who have it as the second instinct, this may sound familiar to them. And of course, also type and value systems are going to have an impact on there. Also very important for the social dominant is that it's very much a reciprocity thing. It's about give and take. It's not about my orgasm. It's not about my sense of merging, because that's what the self-pres and the sexual instinct are very much about. The sexual instinct and the self-pres is very much about my needs. Social is more about tending to the needs of the partner. And then last is this participation zone. And this relates to a lot about identity. To give you one example, homosexuality. There are some people who are non-heterosexual, and they don't make a big deal out of it. They're not shouting everywhere, and people may know about it, and that's okay. There's also people for whom it becomes some kind of almost, it's a matter of their identity. Like, being gay is part of who I am. Not all homosexual people have that. Like, also heterosexual. I mean, why would a homosexual person have that if a heterosexual person doesn't have that? I mean, I'm heterosexual, yes, but I'm not telling everybody I'm heterosexual. Like, if I go somewhere and I meet friends, I'm not saying, oh, by the way, I'm heterosexual. But for social dominant people, this kind of identity thing may be very important. So, for example, homosexuality, social dominant people who are homosexual may very often be very active in like gay pride stuff, organizing all of that, really trying to inform other people about that, stand up for the rights of the gay community, and so on. The other thing related to the social instinct is about hierarchy. If we're looking at the Bay Area, nowadays, you've got all this kind of new social constellations that are somehow based on sex. Polyamory, kink communities, roping families, all of those kind of things are like, how do we create new ways of relating in this society by using sex as the marker of our identity? Again, for social dominant people, this is going to be an important aspect of who they are, how they identify, how they relate with other people. Some people may be into BDSM, but they're not going to like be part of the BDSM community or something like that. It's just like what they like. And the last thing, and I don't want to confuse you now, is that people with a strong social instinct have a bigger ability for non-monogamy. Does this mean that they're more prone to be non-monogamous? No. It just means that if they are in a situation of non-monogamy, they're going to be able to deal with it in a much more easygoing way, because they can divide their attention and energy to more than one person simultaneously. They have less of this sense of possession of the partner. There's less of a jealousy. It's more of like, how do we relate to each other? So, for example, if somebody thinks like, oh, I would like to open up my marriage, and the partner is social blind, impossible. 0 chances. If you're looking, for example, in Islamic countries where you have non-monogamy being formalized, so for example, you've got a man and he's got 4 wives. If this man is social dominant, most often it's going to work pretty well. He's going to be able to distribute his attention, his care, his financial resources among his wives, among all these kids. If this person is social blind, it's going to be mess, it's going to be chaos, it's going to be suffering for everybody. Again, without overgeneralizing, right? But there is a certain tendency. So that's what I wanted to say about the instincts. I went into quite some detail here, but I think it's very important for you to understand. And now that we're looking at non-monogamy, so the big question, which type is most prone to non-monogamy? Any type. There is not a single type that is more prone to it. At least that is our conclusion so far. And it actually makes sense. Why do people stray? look, if your needs are not met, then you look somewhere else. And this brings us to the motivations of sex. You have a motivation for sex. If that motivational need is not met, you're going to look elsewhere. And yes, value systems, types, instincts may also play a role into how you're going to deal with this desire to look elsewhere. The self-preservation dominant is going to think, I would like to cheat, but it's so much energy because you have to hide it. And then before coming back home, you have to take another shower and you have to make sure you take some fresh underwear with you. Too much of a hassle. No, I'm not going to cheat. Also, like opening up the marriage for a self-preservation dominant is like, oh my God, you have to go on the internet, you have to look around, and it's such a hassle. It takes so much energy. Like, I'll just use my hands instead, right? So this may be a reason why the self-preservation dominant may just not go for it. But there is also reasons why they may actually go for it. I'm not saying that self-preservation people are less inclined to do it, not at all, right? Because they may seek out the prostitute, for example. That's easy. I mean, you don't have to go through this whole long courting process of finding a mistress. Yeah, you've spent some financial resources, but you don't have to deal with the emotional needs and so on afterwards. And at the end of the day, you got your orgasm. That's the main thing you wanted. So for self-preservation dominant people, prostitution may be a way to deal with not having the sexual needs met at home. Sexual dominant people may want to cheat because they want to go outside, but they may also say that I'm not going to do it because my partner is the person I merge with. I cannot have sex with somebody else. Like, then what about my partner? What about this ideal relationship I have? It's just not going to work out. Also, social people may not do it because they may say that, well, the social instinct is also very much about some moral values, about some kind of societal structure, and they may say that it is just not right. This is not how relationships are going to function. Also, type-specific things may come in, why a person may cheat or may seek consensual non-monogamy by opening up marriage or something like that. There may be reasons why they do it, why they don't do it. There's ways how they're going to try. For example, look, type 8. Also, the way if somebody is caught being cheating, they're all going to have their own way of dealing with it. At type 8, what are they going to do? What's the defense mechanism? Denial. Like, what does somebody like Donald Trump say when like, imagine he's caught red-handedly with a prostitute. What would he say? No, I didn't do it. You show the video recording, like, no, I didn't do it. You're making it up. Oh, that's fake news. Like, pure denial. Or you'll have others who are going to say, like, yeah, so what? Right? And I think it was French President Mitterrand, I think, who had a mistress, and I think he even had a kid with the mistress, and it was like, et alors? Yes, I had sex with her, so what? Right? Others are like, 7s are horrible at hiding it. I mean, if 7s are going to cheat, like, I give them 2 weeks maximum. They just can't hide it. They're just like too enthusiastic, like too much fun, too much emotion. It's going to be obvious, right? So there's all these things about type and instinct that are going to, you really need to look at the combination of every single subtype. Like, why do they cheat? How do they deal if they're being cheated upon? How do they deal with the desire for opening up the marriage? All these kind of things. But the main thing is really to understand, it's not about like who's cheating the most. The question is, why do people seek sex outside of the marriage? And I think the challenge we have here is that in our society, we always sympathize with, let's say, the victim, and we demonize the one who did wrong. And I can understand it, because it is a wrongdoing. Cheating is morally wrong, no matter which kind of value system you have. That's something that if you look at spiral dynamics, through all the stages, cheating is always going to be wrong. There's only a few tribes in Africa where cheating is considered to be a good thing. But that's like 0.0001% of human society. Cheating is always morally wrong. But I think in order to deal with issues of cheating, just demonizing the wrongdoer and just saying, oh, the poor person who was suffering from this is maybe a little bit simplistic, because it's not going to lead to a solution. Yes, you need to sympathize with that. But what about the third person that's involved, for example? Like, what about the position of that person as well? Also, that one is seen as the bad one, the one who broke the marriage, things like that. So I think that instead of trying to look at demonizing and victimizing, a more constructive thing, or what people should move to after these first emotions have settled a little bit, is looking at, like, why is this happening? Because very often what is happening is that people are going to say, oh, my spouse is a sex addict, or like, I have a higher libido than my partner. Like, what does this mean? Is there such a thing as having a higher libido than the other? Actually, no. I'll explain you why. Libido is very much linked with the levels of development. It's about the desire. What is libido? It was already mentioned. It's like this vital energy, this raw thing, this life force. The higher you are in the levels of development, the more at ease you are. You're not really craving to experience that, because things are very good. You feel somehow empowered. You feel fulfilled. You feel satisfied. There's no craving for feeling that somehow. We're not talking about the sexual instinct only. Everybody has that vital energy that they want to experience. So libido is just one manifestation of that. But it's about seeking pleasure. It's about fulfilling your lustful needs. Some people will try to fulfill their lustful needs through sex. Others will do it through food. Others will do it through shopping. So the point is that we all have some kind of measure of lust inside of ourselves. And in any relationship where the people are truly connected, they're going to be at exactly the same level of development. I don't buy the thing that, oh, I have done work on myself, but my partner has not, and so on. No, not at all. Because actually telling that you've done all the work and your partner has not is just an example, is actually the proof of your own sense of superiority towards your partner. Levels of development are like communicating vessels in physics. If one goes up, the other one is also going to go up. If the one goes down, they're also going to go down. They're going to be at the same level. Now, when we bring that to this desire to experience this life force, a very common thing is that the man wants to have more sex, the woman wants more food or more shopping. What's the point of shopping, spending money, buying things that you really like, that gives you pleasure, just the point of buying that's going to hang in your cupboard, and then 3 years later you throw it away and you never wore it? That's a form of pleasure seeking. So couples that have different libidos just have a different tool for seeking this pleasure, because pleasure is always a compensation for not finding meaning in life. Those of you who read Viktor Frankl, right? He said, pleasure is, what is it? Like, pleasure is the replacement for meaning in life or something like that. And pleasure can be sex, it can be clothes, it can be alcohol or anything like that. So also the whole thing about sex addiction. Well, first of all, very often people who have sexually repressive views may accuse their spouse of being a sex addict because he wants to have sex once a week. Well, it's not about that. It's about just an issue of different different ways of finding pleasure. I'm not saying that there is no such thing as sex addiction, but we just have to be clear, what does sex addiction mean? An addiction means that you repeat a behavior as a form of a compulsion. It is stronger than yourself, and it has a destructive impact on you and your direct environment. If it is leading to major problems, for example, you start having sex with your coworker in the office because you cannot hold yourself, that is something that is somehow, that has a certain destructive impact. But if it is just you feel a desire once a week, that's not sex addiction. That is just having a sex drive. So there really needs to be a compulsive aspect, and there really needs to be the inability to control yourself. And it must have a negative impact somehow. Okay? But then again, if one has sex addiction, if one person has sex addiction, that's always related to the level of development of that person. Addictions are always a manifestation of not being at ease and at peace with yourself. It's a lack of meaning in your life. It's a lack of this fulfillment, this satisfaction with what you're doing in your life. People who are alcoholics, they just want to numb out. They don't want to, they cannot bear the suffering. Drugs is also a way of coping with the suffering. Sex, gambling, they can also be ways of not facing your own suffering. But that also means that the partner is most likely going to have other ways of addictions. And the reality is that in our contemporary society, there are many addictions that are considered to be normal. Food addiction, sugar addiction, Facebook addiction, reading news addiction, gossiping addiction, meeting friends addictions, work addiction. So I think when we're talking about sex addiction, it's very important to take all of that, I mean, to really think about that a little bit. So the last thing that I want to do is 1 minute per type, very quickly. I'm happy to share the slides with you later. So let me share the screen again. Oops, what did I do here? Oh, no. Share screen. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the type as a caricature, let's say, without taking the subtype into account. And many of you may not feel yourself into that. So for example, when I talk about one sexual one is going to be pretty different. 5 sexual 5s are going to say like, what is this slide about? Like, I don't identify with any of that. And this is actually one of the reasons why we wanted to go deeper into studying the subtypes. But if we're looking at type 1, something that comes up very often is this idea of worthiness, of I have to deserve sex, my partner has to deserve sex, my partner has to be a worthy person. Like a one-night stand for many may not be like worthy, it may not be right. For some others, depending on the value system again, right? In some other value systems, it may be fine, like having a one-night stand is right, for others wrong. So this is why I say that you really need to look at the value systems, and spiral dynamics comes in very handily here. Also appropriateness of like, there's a very clear view of like what is appropriate, what is not. Like oral sex, is that appropriate or not? Anal sex, appropriate or not? They have a very clear view of that. Type 1 very often likes the physicality, and very often type 1, it's always a threesome, yeah? They have the inner critic, so when they're in bed, there's always this inner critic, am I doing the right thing? Is this good? Should I be doing this? Shouldn't I be doing that? And so on. It's pretty difficult for type 1 to put that off. And they're also pretty performance-oriented, lack of spontaneity, except if they're able to tap into their 7 line. Because then sometimes 7s can be very spontaneous in sex, but it's not always going to show up automatically. The performance orientation can lead to performance anxiety, which can lead to erectile dysfunctions, problems achieving orgasm, and so on. But very important is that type 1 is a very control-oriented type. And what they feel is like, very typical for them is like they want the partner to be in charge, but in their own way. It's like, I want you to be in charge, but on my way. Type 2, super interesting. Because for those of you who have some experience with clinical psychology or psychiatry, or who have looked at it, there's a certain correlation between personality disorders and types. So for example, type 1, if they're very unhealthy, they may be prone to lead to an obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Type 2 may be linked to a histrionic personality disorder. Type 3, there is no personality disorder linked to that, because people who are just achieving more and more, that's been seen as a good thing, so that's not a disorder. Type 4, well, there are some disorders there. 5, it's like the schizotypal disorder. 6, paranoid personality disorder. 8 is the antisocial, and so on. But type 2 is linked to the histrionic personality disorder. And what is that? Like, what is hysteria? Hysteria is something that doctors have been writing about for 4,000 years already. And hysteria comes from the Greek word hyster, which is the womb. I always thought that hysteria is a reaction of a cold womb. It's a womb that is not actively used. And if we're looking, for example, in even psychoanalysis in the early 20th century, how were women with hysteria treated? Anybody knows? The therapist would administer a paroxysm to the female. What does that mean? In contemporary wording, he would masturbate her until she gets an orgasm. Paroxysm is orgasm. Why? Because due to this release, it's like this reset of the central nervous system. Also in the in folkloric wisdom, there is this thing that if a woman is somehow cranky, it's like, well, she probably didn't have sex for a long time, right? This is where it comes from. And again, I mean, it's maybe, I mean, there is a certain truth to it. The underlying thing is there, but the way that it's portrayed is a little bit off, actually. But type 2 is very much linked to this histrionic aspect. And they're full of paradoxes. You would think that all these paradoxes and inner contradictions are for 6s, but that's actually type 2. Because outwardly, they can be very seductive, but then they're very inhibitive in the bedroom. It's all about emotions for them, but they're very emotionally contained in the bedroom most often. They're very demanding of intimacy of the partner. They want the partner to fully open up. They want the partner to fully surrender to them, but the 2 is not going to surrender to the partner. Very often they overrate sex and they underrate sex at the same time, because very often they may use sex as a tool of conquering the other person. Type 2 has a very seductive element, and they will use whatever it takes in this seductive game. So they may use sex as a tool to conquer the other person, but once you have conquered the other person, why do you still need sex? So that's why they may underrate it, because they just look at it, it's just a tool for like luring the partner into liking me. It's not about their own sexual pleasure very often. So as a result, they may objectify themselves because they really want to make sure that the partner has the best sexual experience. They objectify themselves. They may want to portray themselves as some kind of porn star, and then they're upset at the partner for treating them like a sex object. But they're putting themselves very often in that position as well. And this is why very often type 2 will very often either overindulge in sex, so nymphomania, or they may underindulge in sex. Like, I have no needs. I'm more elevated than that. I'm like, you know, like these saints, they also don't have sex. So they can really oscillate between these two very often. Again, the instinct is going to play a big role because the sexual two is going to have, I mean, the sexual instinct is going to bring something completely different to that as well. Now, of course, yeah, they take pride in their indispensability. They really want to please the partner. And twos are actually pretty dominant in the bedroom. They want to be in charge, or they want to have it their way, not necessarily that they're in charge, because if there's a self-preservation instinct, then they're going to be energy aware. But the dominance more in terms of like they are going to decide what's going to happen. Also in terms of BDSM, for example, they may be rather dominant. So actually, if you really look at it very deep, type 2 has something very similar to type 8. They both violate the boundaries of the person that they are connected to, but they just do it in opposite manners. 8 does it in a very aggressive way. 2 does it in a way that you can't say anything about it because then you're going to look like the bad guy. But they do violate boundaries. They think they're much closer than they are in reality. Now, type 3, it's very much about two things, sexual desirability and sexual success. So very much, actually, like for all the image types, it's very much about how do I look? How am I perceived? Very much that during the sexual play, they really think like, how is my partner looking at me now? I mean, not like how is he looking, but like what is he thinking of me? Like what image am I portraying? And it also leads to this thing about masculinity and femininity that's very important. Very interesting is that type 3 does not like being called bad names. I mean, there are some people who like using some kind of vulgar language in the bedroom and it turns them on. You see this very rarely in type 3. It may happen as a counter reaction too, but most often it's going to turn them off. And also very often, again, also in relationships in general, 3s tend to prefer partners who are somehow less desirable because they don't want to compete with a partner. Now, it's also very much about success. They want to make a good performance. Even the self-preservation 3, I mean, the self-preservation is going to lead to some kind of energy efficiency, but it is still that I want to be a good lover. And if I have to put in the energy, I'm going to put in exactly how much energy is needed in order to be the good lover. I want to be the good spouse. I want to be the good father. I want to be the good mother. I want to be the good this, and I want to be a good lover. Or like, I want to be a great lover. I want to excel in everything. So this is where you can see that sometimes the instinct and the type can like contradict each other. So yeah, so there is also this performance-related thing. It's about making a good impression, and there's like this underlying thing of proving themselves. And again, many of the things that I'm talking about is all subconscious, right? It's not that we think about it, but once you really start analyzing it, you may start noticing more than you're willing to admit at first sight. And of course, because of this performance attitude, there may be quite some performance anxiety in 3s. Erectile dysfunctions in 3s is massive. Problems achieving orgasm in male 3s is a real thing. But the other thing is that actually in type 3 is also very assertive type. So in women, for example, you may hear it a little bit less that type 3, that the female 3 has challenges achieving orgasm because there's more of this like, I deserve it, I'm going to have it. There's other types that have big problems, like 2s, for example, can have huge problems in achieving orgasm. For type 2, actually, why is it very difficult for them to have orgasm in partnered sex? Because they don't want to surrender to the partner. Because if you surrender to the partner, that means that the partner has power over you. He was able to give you an orgasm. That means that you are now, that he's basically now, that you become entitled to him, actually. So very often type 2 is like, I want you to give me an orgasm, but I'm not going to allow you to give me an orgasm. Because that way, I still keep you indebted to me. I'm going to give you a great orgasm. I won't have one. And then you're going to listen to me. So you see, this is this dominant play that comes up, which is, of course, I say it in a very blunt, direct way, but it's very subtle in reality. Now, type 4, I'll try to go quicker a bit. So sex is not really that much about the sexual act that much. So it's very much against this orgasm-oriented thing. It's very much about the emotion that it evokes. So, for example, a 4 that I know, she really likes like when her nipples are squeezed, not because she likes the pain, but because it gives this kind of rush of emotions inside of her. There's also an idealization, right? This whole romantic thing. Very often, like this same 4, like when she was talking about how she lost virginity, she came up with this great story of this guy, very beautiful thing, that he had put like these rose petals on the bed and so on and so on and so on. And then when we had an honest discussion, it was actually a pretty bad experience. She was actually almost abused, you could say, and she didn't want to have sex for the next 3 years. But there's still this idealization of the future and idealization of the past somehow. It's like unable, but then at the same time also really staying into these bad experiences and so on. So it's like a huge cocktail, and it's often not being honest about like how a sexual experience reality. So there's also a lot of longing for it. There's always like something's missing somehow. It's like something's like, yeah, maybe sex is good, but like something's off. Also, they have lots of fantasies about being a sex goddess, even men. Male 4s can feel like they're a sex goddess. But in reality, then they can also be pretty prudish, actually. It's like their fantasy, but then the reality doesn't match and it just makes things worse. And also lots of envy, of course. They have lots of envy. They really think that others have such a better sex life than they have. So 5s, it's very much a mental activity, but it's a good way for them to get out of the body. Some 5s may be asexual, especially self-preservation 5s may turn asexual, but sexual 5s not at all. And actually, the most amazing, incredible, shocking stories that you can hear about sex will come from the sexual 5s. The greatest fantasies, like if you want to hear great sexual fantasies, just talk to sexual 5s. You'll just be blown away about sex with aliens, about being abducted, being then chained into some kind of room, stuff like that. Really, I mean, like when I did these focus groups, after some time, like nothing's shocking you anymore, right? Also traumatic things, you start, I mean, of course, traumatic things, they always touch you, but nothing's really like, oh my God, I had never heard anything like that, until you start speaking to sexual 5s. That's like, that's a different universe. Yeah, so often like they can have, especially if they're virgins, they can have lots of theories about sex. We had a very interesting polyamorous virgin who was a 5. So he was polyamorous, but no sexual experience, and he wanted to keep it that way. And he had lots of brilliant theories about sex. The only detail was, of course, he was a virgin and had no experience, no first-hand experience. Well, first-hand experience, yes, but not partnered sex experience. Let's say that way, all right? Very important for 5s is a post-sex analysis. This is what creates a lot of the intimacy for them. Afterwards, they want to analyze, like, how was this? How was that? Was that better than that time? How did this feel? Like, I touched you in this way. How was that? Like, did that work? Some 5s may even write it down, and they may even write reports and send it to their partner, something like that. And for a non-5, it's like, what the heck? But like, if you're partnered with a 5, don't do this. Like, because this is the moment where the true intimacy is built for a 5. This is where they open up. This is where they open up the deepest of themselves. This is where they talk about their emotions. And it's really not to be taken lightly. In sex, they can be actually pretty direct and controlling. So they're not like these inactive people, because 5s is not that they have no energy. It's just that they only spend their energy on things that matter. And if sex matters, they're going to put their energy to it. And very often, especially if they're not sexual dominant, they just don't get subtle hints. So for example, a friend of mine, she's a sex therapist herself, her husband is a 5. She can just like dance naked in front of her husband. He's just not going to get the hint. She's going to say, oh, honey, I'm going upstairs already. It's like, yeah, okay, fine, you can go, I'll come. I'm still going to work here. I'll come in 2 hours. Some fives just don't get it. You just have to say, look, I want to have sex. You want to go? Sixes in general are very happy with the marriage, but very often you're going to hear that like everything is fine, just like this one thing like sex. Why? Because sixes are very good at rationalizing everything. They're able to find a solution to everything because they can be pretty pragmatic. But sex is not something pragmatic. There's something irrational about the whole thing. And it's like they want to square the circle and it's just not going to work. And also, they're very much in the head. Really thinking like during the sexual act, oh, what if this happens? Am I doing it the right way? What about this? Oh, I heard something in the corridor. What if this happens? And so on. And it's like killing their own libido and it's killing the libido of the partner. And actually, I mean, they have actually lots of libido killing aspects, especially the self-preservation six. I mean, the self-preservation dominant six, which is sexual blind, I call them the libido assassins. Because they can just do anything to kill somebody's libido. Why? Sixes want predictability, but sex is not about predictability. Many people don't like it. It needs to be spontaneous. The other thing is that they just cannot relax. They're always like anxious. They're thinking of what can happen. They're also super sensitive. Very often they have a sensitive body. Emotionally, they're sensitive, and that can like, I don't know. Then they're also not self-confident. Like, there is nothing erotic about somebody who says like, well, you know, I want to please you, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it. Well, I'll try to, but hey, please don't be upset. But like, sorry. I mean, then an 8 is much better, right? An 8 that says like, I'm going to have sex with you and I'm going to prove I'm the best lover you've ever had. There is something arousing about that, yeah? But this lack of self-confidence in the sixes can kill libido, of course. And maybe the last, oh yeah, and sixes in general can agree to anything. Any fantasy or anything you want to test out, in general, sixes are going to agree as long as they know in advance. They just need to be prepared. And egalitarianism is very important. It's all about equal action. Everything has to be 50-50, so turn taking. Like I put in 50%, you put in 50%. But then, and that's the real interesting, sometimes then they're going to feel uncomfortable when they perceive that the partner is doing quite a lot. So it's not that both parties have to do 50%, it's that both parties have to be willing to do their share. Because they can actually feel uncomfortable sometimes. They prefer to be in the lead because then they're at least in control. And if you're in control, you know what's going to happen. If your partner is in the lead, you may not know what the next thing is going to be. So you see lots of inner things happening there. And that's not arousing for most partners. Now, sevens, of course, fun, right? They want to have fun in life. And sex is the only place in their life where they can just still be a bit like a kid, like this playfulness. Also practical jokes. Right, like imagine the woman is a 7. The man is ready, they're all excited. The man wants to penetrate his wife. And she's just going to squeeze her leg so he cannot penetrate her. Ha ha ha, like that's funny, right? Like this kind of practical jokes even that they're going to have. Some people like it, some others are going to be turned off by that, but you just have to know where this is come from. Yeah, so of course they can be like too much. There's lots of intensity. They can very often move from one thing to the other. They may be already thinking of the next thing to do in sex without being really present. And it's not that only 7s have problems with presence in sex. Every type has it. They can have lots of imagination, of course. I mean, 7s are the most imaginative, possibly. Well, together with 4s, maybe. And yeah, then sometimes sex is everything, and the next moment sex is nothing. So if you think that 7s are people who have the most active sex lives, that's not necessarily true. There's quite some 7s who are actually asexual, just because they're not able to have this whole playfulness they want, and they're unable to really communicate with their partner. Type 8, sex is very straightforward. Orgasm-oriented, very often, very high intensity. They're not going to settle for sexual dissatisfaction. If they're not happy, they will make it a partner. They will make it known. Very often they're sexually mature at a younger age. They're also curious at younger ages. Very self-confident, which can be arousing. Very orgasmic. I have not met many female 8s who have problems achieving orgasm. Why? Because I'm entitled to it. I want to have it. I'm going to get it. Again, maybe one takeaway. What is the biggest determinant if somebody is going to get an orgasm? Anybody can achieve an orgasm. There's only one thing. You're going to get an orgasm if you believe you can get one. If you think, I'm not going to get an orgasm, it's just not going to work, you can do whatever you want, it's not going to happen. Type 8 thinks, I want an orgasm, I'm going to have it. Of course I can have it. I'm not going to have one, I'm going to have 4. Right? This whole lustfulness, that makes him less prone to this kind of sexual disorders. There's other things that they're more prone to sexual abuse, of course, because of the antisocial aspect that can be there in lower levels of development. So a strong masculine energy, very dominant, but at the same time, they can also sometimes feel that this is a place where they can finally relax. And that's a very interesting, like, contradiction at first sight, but very many 8s is like, finally I can relax here. Finally, I don't need to dominate. Finally, I don't have to fight. And last one, type 9, how did they have sex? Well, it just happened. They just went with the flow. How did you meet your partner? It just happened. How did it come that you cheated on your partner? It just happened. Well, it didn't just happen. There's some subconscious things there. But they're very inert, actually. They happen to go with the flow, which doesn't mean that they're inactive. It doesn't mean they're lazy. They can actually be pretty active as well if they're with an active partner. But they're pretty unlikely to initiate, actually. And also they're pretty similar to 6s. They can be pretty adaptable, okay, with the wishes of partners, but they don't have this assertive energy that you will find in the 8. So there we are. These were the 9 types very quickly, and of course, without taking into account the subtypes. And I went a little bit over time, and I hope that that's not too much of an issue for you, of course.
Not at all. That was absolutely riveting and fascinating, Frederik. Thank you so much. I'm not sure, Frederik, are you able to stay for a short Q&A if we do have any questions?
Yeah, sure. I can still stay for another 15 minutes or so to answer some questions. I don't want to let you leave now with maybe so many things in your head and not being able to sleep tonight.
Thank you so much. That was really, really valuable and absolutely fascinating. Does anybody have any questions while we still have Frederik with us? I think you answered a lot. I think you answered all the questions. Fiona?
That was fascinating. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed the content. I've got such a wider view about sex, about the Enneagram, how important the subtypes are and how different it can be. I'm just interested because you've already got so much information, yet you're still busy with your research. So what do you think might come up that you haven't already discovered, or is it more a fine-tuning space that you're working on now?
So what we're doing now is validating some of this stuff and going into more nuances among the subtypes. That's the main thing. Because we have seen that the subtypes are massively important. They're very different. I mean, because actually what I did now with these 9 slides on the types, it's actually not fully fair because some things may relate, other things may like be completely the opposite. And I think in general, I think we do not understand the subtypes themselves well enough. They're going very, very deep. I think all this kind of theories with wings, tri-types, and so on, I'm like not there because there's so many. I think that a lot of these tri-type discussions are just ways of not wanting to see what's really happening in yourself. So many things that you can really explore. So another thing that I'm doing together with these focus groups now is that I am going to write some books on the subtypes. If you're looking, I mean, there's quite a few books on the subtypes. But they're giving pretty short descriptions. They don't really go very deep. It's still somehow difficult to realize, like, where am I? And some books are good at describing some types, and then they're completely off on other subtypes. So what I'm working on now is, it's going to be 3 books. 3 books that are going to describe each of these subtypes. Every subtype is going to be about 10 to 12,000 words, which is, we're talking about 30 pages or something, yeah, per subtype. So I have already done this for all the 5s and the 6s, for the 6 subtypes. And I also use the subtype discussion groups as a way to validate, to give more nuance, to see, like, what can we add to that. And again, because the subtypes are so important, we just don't get it well enough. I think that many people are mistyped, and even in the Enneagram community, many people who have been dealing with the Enneagram for many years are still mistyped because they don't understand the subtypes well enough. And so, really, to come back to your question, is that it's like a mosaic. I have like 50% is there, and I know what is missing, and I know what exactly I have to ask to fill in the missing pieces. Because, for example, I know how an 8 reacts when they're being cheated upon. I don't know it for all the other types. I know, like, what some of the fantasies are for some subtypes, but not for everybody. So I just need to ask, like, I just need to look like, I know this for this subtype, not this one, that, and that, and that, and that's it. So the book itself that's going to come out is going to be it's going to be a pretty thick volume. It's not going to be like 120 page. It's more going to be like A4 format, 300 pages or something like that. It's, again, forgive me, self-preservation 6, I want to go thorough. And it's like, it's going to be like an introduction to 6 and the Enneagram in 12 volumes. It's this kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds amazing. What's it going to be called, Frederik? What's the title of the book?
I don't know it yet. So if anybody has, like, zero creativity here, I would say like 6 and the Enneagram, but that's a boring title, right? So if anybody has something better, like something that's really going to catch the attention of people, like, let me know. I was already thinking like something maybe like lies in the bedroom, because at the end of the day, it's all about how we lie to ourselves. Maybe lies in the bedroom seems like more appealing somehow.
Yeah, maybe as a subtext. I think 6 in the Enneagrams, you know, we know what we're getting and we know what we're looking at. I don't think it's a boring title.
But it's boring, and like, people who don't know the Enneagram are not going to pick up a book like that. I also want to cater to the non-Enneagram community, and I want to, let's say, drag them into it somehow.
Yeah.
Because again, I do believe that for therapists, this is going to be super useful, especially for sex therapists and marriage counselors.
Yes. Amazing.
Renata,
yes,
can I
Deb?
ask? I think Terry asked the question of, is there still opportunity to participate in some of your groups and research and so on?
Definitely. Let me put down my email address here, because somebody already asked for it. Just drop me a line and I will include you. Just if you're a type 5 or 6, then you're too late, because those have already started and we're already halfway through. But I'm also interested in doing one-on-one interviews, because the more people I talk to, the more juicy examples I'll get.
Frederik,
so,
sorry.
So if any of you feels like, well, maybe focus groups is not the format, but I would be very happy to share my thoughts, my stories, just reach out to me. For you, it's going to be free therapy, because I'm going to force you to go into some thinking processes that you never did before and that you may not want to do, but that are going to be very useful at the end. And I'm going to get some interesting stories out of it.
John's given a suggestion for the title for your book, 6 Lies in the Enneagram.
Yeah, maybe. I'll put that one down as well. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, and Deb says love lies in the bedroom. Okay, love that. All right. Any other questions, comments? Don?
I assume we'll get Frederik's email later or somehow.
Yes, I will send it out. And Frederik, you'll send me the slides and anything else that you want to include.
Yes.
That we can send out.
I'll send the slides, and there's also some other slides that you can look at. They're self-explanatory. But really, if you're interested, I would say go to this YouTube channel where I have all these videos. And you don't have to take them in the right sequence, but if you take them in that sequence as they are, it's going to be easier to understand everything. And really, really start with the first lesson on the value systems, because that is going to give you the basis on which to put everything else. And it's also very light thing. It's like a look at human history through the lens of sex. It's a funny way. It's more interesting than how you studied history at school, I think.
Yes. Great.
Frederik, can you put the link to the YouTube channel in, please? Or
Yes.
the name of it?
Yeah,
Please.
it'll be in the email as well, Debs. It was in the emails that were sent out already.
Yeah, but look, it's there, so you can have a look. And yeah, again, if you want to get more information, anything you want to share, just reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk about this.
Wonderful. Anybody else? All right. Frederik, thank you. Staying up late for us.
No problem. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your attention and all the questions.
Yeah, that was really, really valuable and fascinating. Deeply appreciated. Thank you so much. And amazing that you're going to continue to do this amazing research. So yeah, very, very grateful. Thanks to everybody who came, and I'm sure many will be watching the recording. So love you madly, everybody. Adios, amigos.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks very
Thank you
much.
so much. Bye.